The Biden-Harris administration is committed to reliable, affordable, high-speed internet for all Americans. My focus today is going to be on fixed broadband to people's homes, not because mobile broadband isn't important, it is, but because, as the pandemic has shown us, it is generally not a substitute for reliable, high-speed fixed connectivity to people's homes. Fiber optic connections are the gold standard. They are long-lasting and capable of gigabit speeds. Cable service via coaxial cable also provides high-speed connections, and cable companies are increasingly deploying with fiber. Don't worry, that's as deep as I'll get into the technology, but it's important to be aware of the difference between providers who can offer real high-speed connections and those who can't and aren't. To be clear, although I'm focusing today on fixed high-speed internet service to people's homes, that doesn't mean we don't need to talk about equity and access to mobile broadband or the importance of high-speed internet access to all our schools, libraries, other community anchor institutions, to businesses, nonprofits, homeless shelters, and I could go on. But please understand that the deeper we drive fiber into the networks, the more all of those forms of connectivity will be improved. So when we at the White House think about universal broadband, we think about it as having three components. And this will sound familiar to you from what the other speakers have said. First, access. Does the infrastructure for high-speed internet access exist where you live? Second, equity. Second, affordability. Can everyone in the community afford to purchase reliable high-speed internet services? And third, equity. Does everyone have the tools they need to take advantage of high-speed internet service? Do they have the computers and other devices they need? Do they have the knowledge and skills? Or are some communities or some community members lacking access to those tools? The pandemic highlighted the importance of addressing all three components of universal broadband. And I'm not going to go through the litany of reasons why people need internet access. That would use up my whole 7 minutes, and I would be preaching to the choir. But I will say that equal and meaningful access to justice in 2022 and beyond is nearly impossible without fulfilling all three components of universal broadband service. And there are so many layers to that conversation. At the same time, I think that the relationship between access to high quality internet service and meaningful access to justice is an underdeveloped part of the policy conversation. And you are all well situated to bring your knowledge to the policy conversations at the federal and state levels, and I urge you to do so. So the three components. First, access. Not surprisingly, I think you've heard this in other speakers' remarks, rural and tribal areas are more likely than urban areas to lack access to basic high-speed infrastructure, fiber or cable. But there are people in urban and suburban areas without access, and some people in rural and tribal areas with super fast fiber access. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, is building better broadband maps as we speak, which will allow us to identify on a location-by-location basis where there is a lack of access. And what we're going to see is maps that look like Swiss cheese, with different size holes being locations without broadband access. They've done some good broadband mapping in various states, South Carolina, for example. And if you talk to the folks in charge of the South Carolina maps, they call those freckles. But some of those freckles, locations without access, are pretty big. So how are we going to solve the problem of lack of access? Well, as you've heard, the bipartisan infrastructure bill provides $65 billion for broadband. And the largest part of that, $42.45 billion, is the BEAD program at the Department of Congress, which will provide at least $100 million to every state. And the rest of the funds will be divided based primarily on the relative number of locations without access to broadband infrastructure. The focus is on deployment to unserved locations, and every state must consult with its local communities in drawing up broadband plans to spend their money. States and localities don't need to wait for that funding. As you heard, they can and are using American Rescue Plan funding for broadband deployment. In particular, the Treasury Department is distributing state and local fiscal recovery funds and funding from the Capital Projects Program, both of which can be used for broadband deployment, and is a preferred use of funding for the Capital Projects Program. In addition, as you heard from the Undersecretary, the Department of Agriculture right now has a $1.15 billion loan and grant application window for broadband deployment in rural areas open now, which closes later this week in 2 days. And the bipartisan infrastructure bill provided another $2 billion to USDA, the Department of Agriculture, for rural broadband deployment. The Commerce Department is currently rolling out $1 billion worth of grants for broadband deployment, affordability, and access on tribal lands. That funding came from the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill provided another $2 billion for that tribal connectivity program. And it's not just funding. The FCC is required under the bipartisan infrastructure law to conduct a rulemaking and adopt an order to prevent digital discrimination in deployment. As I suspect many of you know, redlining has been a problem that has kept some members of some communities from being served, even where the rest of the communities are served by high-speed internet access. Second, affordability. The bipartisan infrastructure law includes $14.2 billion for the Affordable Connectivity Program, the ACP, which provides subsidies of up to $30 a month for internet service for low-income households and up to $75 a month for tribal households. Eligible households, and this is important because I'm going to ask you all to tell your clients, tell your colleagues, tell your communities about this program. Eligible households are those with household income at or below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. For a family of 4 in 2022, that's $55,500. But you can qualify other ways as well, not just through income level. If one member of the household participates in other benefit programs, including free and reduced school lunch programs, SNAP, WIC, and Medicaid, and others. That is an important program. To sign people up, send them to acpbenefit.org. So that's ACP for Affordable Connectivity Program, benefit.org. I understand the irony of sending people who need broadband access to a website. So there is also a phone number, 877-384-2575. In case you didn't catch that, that's acpbenefit.org or 877-384-2575. And almost every major internet service provider and many of the smaller ones are participating in this program. There are more than 100 internet service providers participating in the program. In addition, many of the deployment funding sources that I mentioned come with a requirement or an encouragement for participating providers to offer at least one affordable option to their subscribers. So as those deployments roll out, we will see more and more affordable options available to American consumers. In addition, competition is crucial to driving down price, and we're using all of the levers we have to encourage competition, including a broadband label rulemaking required of the FCC by the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which will give families the tools they need to compare prices where they have access to more than one broadband provider. Finally, third, equity. Equity has been an underfunded part of broadband. And the bipartisan infrastructure law includes a historic $2.75 billion in funding for equity, for digital equity going forward. That funding is divided into 3 tranches. First, state equity planning. So every state will have funding to come up with a state digital equity plan. Second, state capacity grants to make that planning into reality. And third, competitive grants that nonprofits and other community groups can apply for to help with digital equity in your states and regions. So calls to action. I already told you, spread the word about the ACP benefit. acpbenefit.org or 877-384-2575. You can also look on the Federal Communications Commission's website for a consumer outreach toolkit. So if your organization wants to reach out more broadly to consumers or hand your clients information about the ACP benefit, you can find that information on the FCC's website, and I encourage you to look for it. Second, get involved at the state and local level on broadband plans. As I said, every state is going to do a state broadband plan and a state digital equity plan, and you can be part of those conversations. You have something important to add to that conversation. And I know you all are overworked and have a lot of balls in the air, but please consider participating in those conversations. And consider submitting comments to the FCCU's various rulemakings on digital equity. Again, I think that equal access to justice is really an overlooked part of the digital divide. And you all can add your voices collectively and individually to the conversation in ways that will really make a difference to your clients and to your communities. So I really want to thank you for your time and attention to this issue. It's incredibly important. It's incredibly important to the Biden-Harris administration that we end the digital divide. And we can only do that with the help of everyone in the community. And this is an important part of that community. So thank you for taking time, to everybody who's made presentations, to everybody who's participating in the panel, and to everybody who's taken time out of your day to join the conversation and think about how you can be part of the solution. I really appreciate it.